I used to think I had the perfect life. A beautiful home, a loving husband, two amazing kids, and a routine that felt comfortable, even if a little too predictable at times. I had always believed that our life together was as solid as the foundation of the house we built, a place where everything had its place and nothing ever really shook us. But if you ask me now, I'd tell you that perfect lives don't exist, not really. They're a mirage, something you chase until you realize it's just a blur in the distance. I didn't see it then, though. I was too caught up in the idea of a life that seemed to promise everything. To the outside world, we were the couple everyone envied, the picture-perfect family with smiles in every photo, a love story that seemed unbreakable. It was always the little things that kept us together, or at least, that's what I thought. Early mornings with coffee in hand, the kids' laughter bouncing off the walls, those quiet moments when my husband and I would share a glance that said everything words couldn't. He used to look at me like I was his whole world, and I believed him. I really did. When we met, I was young, full of dreams and ambitions. He was charming, confident, and he swept me off my feet from the very start. The chemistry between us was undeniable. We got married young, maybe too young, but we had what felt like forever ahead of us. I remember the day we bought our house, the excitement of starting our new life together, the way we promised each other we would never let go, no matter what. Those promises lingered like the scent of fresh paint in our new home, filled with hope. The years rolled on and things seemed to fall into place. We had kids, two beautiful children who filled our hearts with joy. Our daughter Emma was 10 and our son Lucas was 7. I never once questioned the rhythm of our family. The school runs, the weekend outings, the family dinners. It was all so routine, yet it was perfect. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first. A glance here, a distracted moment there. My husband, Jack, was always there physically, but emotionally he started slipping away. I noticed it, though I didn't want to. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we had so much going on, work, kids, life, who wouldn't be distracted? But even though I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, I could feel the distance growing between us. It wasn't just the late nights at the office or the constant work trips. It was the way he stopped coming home early, how he began staying late at work without explanation, how our conversations became shorter, more forced. I brushed it off, though. I told myself he was just stressed. Everyone gets stressed, right? It was nothing to worry about. He still loved me. I was sure of it. I had to be. As I went through the motions of everyday life, it wasn't just Jack I noticed slipping away from. It was me too. I'd forgotten what it felt like to laugh without worry, to be spontaneous. Life had become a series of boxes to check off. Work, kids, dinner, sleep. It was routine. And somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of who I was beyond being a wife and mother. The woman who had dreams and desires beyond the confines of family life. But I never imagined that my husband, the man I had built my life with, the man who had promised me forever, would be the one to break me open. Not like this. One afternoon, it all came crashing down. It started like any other day. The kids were at school, Jack was out, and I was catching up on some things around the house. My phone buzzed, just a simple notification, a message from a friend. "You won't believe this, but I think I saw Jack with someone, not you." My heart sank instantly. I laughed it off. It couldn't be true. I was just being paranoid, I thought. There was no way. But that night, when Jack came home late again, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something in the air felt wrong. I wasn't angry yet, just uneasy. And that unease soon turned into something sharper, something that would change everything. I asked him casually, like it was nothing, "How was your day?" He looked at me, his eyes darting away quickly. "Busy, same as always." He paused, like he was considering something, then offered a half-hearted smile. "Sorry I've been so distant lately, just a lot going on at work." I nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't telling me something. Something I had no idea about yet. I should have pressed him then. I should have asked more questions, but part of me didn't want to know. I wanted to believe that everything was still okay, that we could just get through this rough patch like we always had before. But deep down, I felt it, the gut-wrenching feeling that something was terribly wrong. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Jack came home late every night. He became more secretive, always disappearing into his study or taking long, unexplained phone calls. And I just sat there, feeling the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. One evening, I sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine, trying to calm my racing thoughts. That's when my phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number. "Jack, with her again, you deserve to know." The message was short, just a few words, but they were enough to shatter everything. I didn't need to ask who her was, I already knew. The pieces clicked together, the sudden distance, the late nights, the odd behavior. But I still couldn't believe it. My mind raced, my hands shook as I typed a response. "Who is this?" No reply. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know how to process it. I just sat there in shock, unable to move, unable to think clearly. My perfect world was crumbling in front of me, and I didn't know how to stop it. It was in that moment, sitting there alone in the dim light of the living room, that I realized nothing was the same anymore. And it wasn't just Jack who had changed. It was me, too. I woke up the next morning with a weight in my chest, my mind spinning in circles. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kids had already left for school, Jack was nowhere to be found, and the world outside seemed to be moving in slow motion. I wanted to pull the covers back over my head and pretend everything was fine, but I couldn't. I knew the truth now, even if I hadn't fully accepted it yet. It was all there, clear as day. Jack had betrayed me. I had known something was off, but to see it in black and white, to feel the sting of it so sharply, was a different kind of pain. My phone buzzed again, the same unknown number. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart pounding in my ears. "Jack, with her again, you deserve to know." The message was simple, but its impact was anything but. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The truth had already sunk in. It was as though the ground had slipped out from under me, and I was left hanging in midair, desperately trying to find something solid to hold on to. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, trying to breathe through the panic rising in my chest. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I should have been making breakfast for the kids, preparing for the day ahead, but instead, I was frozen, caught in this terrible moment of realization. My entire life had been a lie, and I didn't know how to fix it. I heard the front door open, the sound of keys jangling, and then Jack's voice. He called out a greeting as he stepped inside, but it sounded distant, as though it were coming from someone else entirely. I didn't want to confront him, not yet. I needed time to process, to understand what had happened, but I couldn't escape the feeling that everything had already fallen apart. Jack walked into the kitchen, his usual easy smile on his face, but it faltered when he saw me standing there, motionless, staring at the counter. The tension in the room was thick, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply asked, my voice barely above a whisper, "Who is she?" His face twisted, just for a moment, before he masked it with an uncomfortable laugh. "What are you talking about?" he said, trying to brush it off as if it were nothing. But I saw it in his eyes, something shifted. Something in him knew the jig was up. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Don't lie to me," I spat, the words coming out harsher than I expected. "I know what you've been doing. I saw the messages. I saw the pictures." My voice broke, the flood of emotions finally bursting through. "You've been seeing someone else, haven't you?" For a moment, he stood there, silent, eyes flickering nervously. I could see the guilt all over him, even though he tried to hide it. His shoulders slumped, and he rubbed the back of his neck in that way he always did when he was uncomfortable. Then, without looking me in the eye, he spoke. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his voice soft, but there was no real remorse in it. It just happened, okay." I felt as though the room had closed in on me. My vision blurred with the rush of tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed yet. "How long, Jack?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How long have you been seeing her?" "A few months," he admitted quietly, his gaze shifting to the floor. "But it's not like that, I swear. I don't want to hurt you." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign to my own ears. "Don't want to hurt me?" I repeated. "Jack, you're already hurting me. You've been hurting me for months." The weight of his betrayal settled like a stone in my stomach. I felt nauseous, angry, and utterly broken. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't some fleeting mistake. This was a choice, a conscious decision he'd made to turn his back on me, on our family, and walk away from everything we'd built together. "Who is she?" I asked again, my voice cold now, demanding. Jack hesitated before speaking, and when he did, the words felt like a punch to the gut. Her name is Lisa. She's younger and she's different. A wave of nausea rolled through me. Different, I repeated, as if the word could somehow explain the depth of what he had done. What, because she's younger? Because she's, what, more exciting, more fun? That's not it, he said quickly, his face flushed with guilt. It's not about her being younger, it's just, I don't know. We've grown apart, you and we're different now. I don't want to hurt you, I really don't, but I can't pretend anymore. I felt a sharp sting in my chest, like my heart was being squeezed from the inside. So, you just leave, you just throw everything away? My voice cracked, the tears finally breaking free. I've been here, Jack, I've been here for you, for our family. And this is what I get. I never wanted it to end like this, he murmured, stepping closer. He reached for me, but I pulled back instinctively. I know I've messed up and I'm sorry, but I need you to understand it wasn't about you. I didn't stop loving you on purpose. His words hit me like a tidal wave. His apology felt empty, like he was saying what he thought he was supposed to say. But there was no real regret in his voice, no true remorse. He had already made his choice. I couldn't breathe. The world felt like it was spinning too fast, and my chest ached in a way I couldn't describe. Every memory of us, every promise, every moment I had cherished, felt like it was slipping away from me, and I couldn't hold on tight enough to stop it. You chose her over me, I said quietly, the words sinking in like heavy stones. You chose her over our family. He didn't say anything for a moment. His silence was enough. It was the final confirmation that there was no going back from this. I never wanted to hurt you, he repeated, but it was too late. His words didn't change anything anymore. I stood there, staring at the man I had loved for so long, the man who had promised to stand by me to protect me. And in that moment, I knew something had changed in me, too. I wasn't the woman I used to be. I wasn't the woman who would just accept this and move on, pretending everything would be okay. No, something inside me had shifted. I was angry, yes, but there was something else there, too, a determination, a fire that I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do next. I wasn't going to let him destroy me. I was going to rebuild. I would find a way to reclaim my life with or without him. But first, I needed to confront both him and her. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without a fight. I took a deep breath and looked Jack in the eye. I need some time, I said, my voice steady now. I need time to figure out what comes next. For me, for the kids, but you... I shook my head, forcing back the tears. You have no idea what you've done. Jack opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't wait for him. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in the kitchen, his guilt lingering in the air. The truth was, nothing would ever be the same again, and I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive him. Not yet, but I was done being the victim. The new chapter of my life was about to begin. The days that followed felt like I was wading through thick mud, the weight of everything holding me down. My mind kept replaying the confrontation over and over again, each time with a different outcome, a different response from him. But no matter how many times I ran the scene in my head, the reality was always the same. Jack had chosen someone else. It was hard to focus on anything. My kids, Emma and Lucas, were confused. They didn't understand why Daddy wasn't home for dinner or why I was always on edge. Every time they asked about him, my heart broke. I had to smile and tell them that Daddy was just working late, that everything was going to be fine. But deep down, I knew things would never be fine again. How could they be? I spent my days running on autopilot, going through the motions. I'd get up, get the kids ready for school, try to hold it together, but inside I felt like I was cracking. I wasn't the same person anymore. The woman who once believed in the fairy tale of marriage, who saw her husband as her partner in everything, was gone. Replaced by someone who had been betrayed, who was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her life and somehow move forward. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself sitting in the living room alone. The house felt empty, even though I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the wind outside. I'd always thought of this home as a place of warmth, laughter, and love. But now, it felt cold, as though the very walls had absorbed the bitterness and anger swirling inside me. My phone buzzed again, another text from the same unknown number. Jack with her again, he's staying at her place. I felt a tightness in my chest, my stomach turning. I didn't know what to feel anymore: anger, resentment, pain, or something else entirely. I had heard enough. The texts had become a constant reminder that my life was no longer mine, that my husband, the man I had spent years building a life with, had chosen someone else. But I couldn't let this consume me, not anymore. The next day, I found myself in the mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same person I saw before. She looked tired, defeated. My eyes were bloodshot, my hair unkempt. I didn't recognize her. I didn't want to be her. And then a thought struck me, sharp and clear. I had a choice. I could let this define me. I could let Jack's betrayal break me completely, pull me under and drown in the sadness of it all. Or I could do something about it. I could reclaim my life. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need him to define who I was. I wasn't going to let him control my story anymore. I took a deep breath and made a decision. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be painless, but it had to be done. I had to take control of my own narrative. The next few days were a blur of activity. I found myself reaching out to old friends, women I hadn't seen in years, people who had always been supportive but whom I had distanced myself from over the years. I needed support. I needed a reminder of who I was before all of this, the woman who had passions, dreams, and a life of her own. One friend, Claire, invited me to a yoga class. I had always rolled my eyes at things like yoga, but now I needed something to focus on. To clear my mind, to breathe, to feel something other than the constant ache in my chest. And that first class, it was like a release. The stretching, the breathing, the quiet focus, it gave me a moment of peace that I hadn't felt in days. As I stood there in the quiet room, sweat trickling down my back, I realized something. I was more than the hurt. I was more than Jack's betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I started to feel myself again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After that, I threw myself into finding new routines. I signed up for a cooking class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I found myself rediscovering old passions, things I had let slip away in the years I had devoted to my marriage, to my family. It wasn't easy, though. I had days where I could barely get out of bed, days when I cried until I thought I might drown in my own tears. But I was learning to hold on to those moments of peace, to remember that I was still me. And then came the hardest part, telling the kids. Emma and Lucas were sitting on the couch one Saturday morning, their little faces full of questions. "Mom, why isn't Daddy coming home?" Emma asked, her voice so innocent, so unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the tears at bay. "Honey, Daddy, been away for a while. He's not coming back home, at least not for now." Lucas frowned. "Did we do something wrong? Is it our fault?" "No, baby," I said softly, pulling him close. "You didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault. Sometimes people don't work out and they go their separate ways." It broke me to say those words, to explain it to them. But I had to. They needed to hear it from me. And I wasn't going to let Jack's actions tear apart our family completely. I would rebuild, and I would do it for them. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where Jack used to sit. I thought about everything that had led me here, his affair, the lies, the broken promises. I thought about how my world had been torn apart by someone I had trusted more than anyone else. And I thought about Lisa, the woman Jack had chosen over me. I didn't know much about her, but from what I could gather, she was younger, carefree, and had no history with him. She wasn't weighed down by the responsibilities of marriage, of family. She didn't have the baggage of years of shared memories, the quiet understanding that comes from years of being with someone. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was hurt. I felt like I had been replaced, as though everything we had meant nothing. I wasn't ready to forgive Jack, not yet. But something inside me was changing. I wasn't the same woman who had sat quietly by his side, waiting for him to notice me. I wasn't going to beg for his love or his attention anymore. I was done being the woman who accepted less than what she deserved. I didn't need his approval to move on. I didn't need him to define my worth. I stood up from the table, my hands shaking slightly, but with a newfound sense of resolve. I wasn't sure what my future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was going to find my way out of the darkness, and I was going to do it on my own terms. I was no longer just Jack's wife. I was me, and that was enough. The days after my conversation with the kids felt like I was living in a haze. I had said the words, but I wasn't sure I believed them. How could I? How could I tell my children that everything would be okay when I didn't even know if I could hold it together myself? But I had to. I had to keep it together for them, even if the reality of what was happening, the collapse of my marriage, the betrayal I was still processing, felt like too much to bear. The house felt different now. Jack's absence was a constant presence, a cold shadow hanging over everything. There were reminders of him everywhere: the empty chair at the dinner table, his toothbrush still sitting in the bathroom, the smell of his cologne faintly lingering in the corners of the house. I couldn't seem to escape it. I'd started to go through the motions of life again, like a robot. I dropped the kids off at school, ran errands, and did everything I could to keep the house from falling apart. But there was no denying that I felt lost. I had no idea who I was anymore, not without Jack. My identity had been so wrapped up in him, wife, partner, mother, that when he walked out, it felt as though I had disappeared along with him. I knew I couldn't let this go on. I couldn't let myself become someone who simply existed, going through the motions day after day. I had to make a change, but what did that even look like? I had no idea. One evening, a week after everything had fallen apart, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, staring at a pile of bills that needed to be sorted. It wasn't the most exciting task, but it was a distraction. I tried to focus on the numbers in front of me, but my mind kept wandering. And then my phone buzzed again, a message from Claire. "Hey, I'm thinking about going to that new wine bar tomorrow night. You should join me. It'll be good to get out of the house." At first, I hesitated. I had been in my own world of pain for so long that the idea of stepping out felt overwhelming. But I remembered something. Claire had been my friend before Jack, before the marriage. She knew me as the woman who loved to have fun, who would laugh at anything, who could hold her own in a conversation about anything under the sun. She wasn't just the person who knew me as a mother or a wife. She knew the person I used to be. I thought about it for a moment. It had been so long since I had done something for myself, since I had stepped outside the walls of my broken world. The idea of being social, even in a small way, felt like a lifeline. I typed back a quick message: "Okay, I'm in." The next night, I found myself getting dressed for the first time in what felt like forever. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed getting ready for a night out, choosing a simple but flattering dress, doing my makeup with a little extra effort, and even taking the time to put on heels. It was like I was trying to reclaim something I had lost, something I hadn't realized I missed. When I arrived at the wine bar, Claire was already there, sitting at a table near the back, a glass of red wine in front of her. She smiled when she saw me and waved me over. "You look great," she said as I sat down, her eyes bright with energy. "It's good to see you out of the house." I smiled, feeling a little awkward. I wasn't sure I could do this, to be honest. I've been, I don't know, a little lost. "I get it," Claire said, taking a sip of her wine. "You've been through a lot, but you deserve to have some fun too, right?" I laughed softly. "Fun, what's that anymore?" She chuckled. "Trust me, it's still out there. You just have to find it again." For the next few hours, we talked about everything: life, memories, the things that had been left unsaid. I found myself laughing again, really laughing, not just going through the motions. Claire was a reminder of who I used to be, of the woman who was independent, who didn't just exist but actually lived. And it felt good. When I got home later that night, the kids were already asleep. The house was quiet, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel empty. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I could feel a spark inside me that hadn't been there before, a spark of something more than just survival. Over the next few days, I kept up with the new routines. I started exercising regularly, something I had neglected for far too long. I signed up for a photography class, another passion of mine that had been pushed aside. I started taking more time for myself, for the woman I used to be. I wasn't doing it to please anyone, certainly not Jack, but for me? For the person I had forgotten existed beneath the roles I had been playing. But even as I focused on myself, a part of me couldn't stop thinking about him. About Lisa. about how Jack had walked away from everything we had and how quickly he had replaced me with someone else. I knew it wasn't healthy to keep obsessing over them, but I couldn't help it. And then, one afternoon, I saw them. It was a Saturday, and I had taken the kids to the park. We were having a picnic, the sun shining brightly and the air warm with the scent of summer. I had tried to forget about the mess in my life, to focus on the moment with my kids, but that all changed when I saw Jack. He was sitting on a bench with her, Lisa. My heart stopped for a moment, my eyes narrowing. There they were, laughing together, his arm around her, looking so natural, so comfortable. It was like I wasn't even in the picture anymore. I should have turned away, walked in the other direction, but instead, I stood frozen, watching them. Watching my husband with another woman. Watching him build a life with her, something I thought was only supposed to be for us. Something inside me snapped. I didn't go to confront them, not then. But I realized something in that moment. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I wasn't going to let Jack and Lisa continue to live their lives without consequences. Not because I wanted to get back at them, but because I needed closure. I needed to stand up for myself, to show them that I was no longer the woman they could walk all over. When I got home, I felt the familiar sense of anger building inside me again, but this time, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to be the woman who had been tossed aside like an old jacket. The next day, I called Jack. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady. "I need to see you, in person." His voice faltered. "I don't think there's much left to talk about." "Maybe," I said, "but I think you owe me that much." And that was when the real confrontation began, when everything I had been holding inside came to a head. The air felt different the moment I hung up the phone. It was like a shift had occurred, a moment of clarity cutting through the fog that had clouded my mind for so long. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done with the endless cycle of pain and confusion. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how long I had been living in the shadows of a marriage that had stopped being about us a long time ago. Jack had already made his decision. He had already moved on with someone else. But I hadn't. I had been stuck in this place of waiting for an apology, for an explanation, for something, anything to make sense of what had happened. But that was over. I wasn't going to wait for his validation anymore. I decided that the next time I saw Jack, it wasn't going to be about us anymore. It was going to be about me. It was time to reclaim the parts of myself I'd buried for years, before I became a wife, before I became a mother, before I became defined by my relationship. When he walked through the door that afternoon, I didn't recognize the man who had once been the love of my life. Maybe it was the way his eyes couldn't meet mine, the way his posture sagged slightly, like he was already bracing for the confrontation. Or maybe it was because I had changed so much in such a short time, and now the gap between us felt insurmountable. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then stepped inside, his footsteps hesitant, like he wasn't sure how to approach me anymore. His gaze flickered around the room, settling on the empty chair at the kitchen table, the same place where we had sat together, years ago, making plans, sharing dreams. The weight of those memories pressed heavily on my chest, but I didn't flinch. "Are the kids here?" Jack asked, his voice soft, almost uncertain. It was a question he'd never asked before. "No," I replied, keeping my voice steady calm. "They're at a friend's house. We need to talk." He didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, his eyes avoiding mine, as if he couldn't look directly at me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew better. I had spent too many years waiting for him to finally give me what I needed, what I deserved. I was done waiting. "Jack," I said, my voice firm now, "I don't want to fight anymore. I don't want to keep pretending that we can just fix things with a conversation or a few apologies. This is about more than just you leaving. It's about everything that led up to that moment. It's about the lies, the deceit, the way you let me become invisible while you found someone else to see you. I deserve better than that." He flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. "I spent years putting you first, putting us first," I continued, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "And look where it got me. You don't get to keep me in this endless limbo anymore. You've already made your choice. Now I need to make mine." Jack's eyes finally met mine. There was something in his gaze, something raw and almost regretful, but it wasn't enough. I didn't need his guilt anymore. I didn't need his half-hearted apologies. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You didn't mean for it to happen? Jack, you made a choice. Over and over again, you chose her. You chose to leave me and you thought I wouldn't notice. Well, I noticed. And I'm not going to let you make me feel like I'm the one who failed here, because you didn't just fail me. You failed us. And you failed our kids. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of the power I was finally letting myself feel. I've been so focused on the loss, on what we were, that I forgot about what I deserve. I forgot about who I am outside of this marriage. I'm done being someone's second choice, Jack. I'm done waiting for your love, your approval, your attention. I'm choosing myself now. His face tightened. You think it's that simple? That you can just walk away from everything we've built? We have kids, we have history. You can't just. I can just walk away, I interrupted, my voice louder now, more confident than I had ever sounded. I've spent too long clinging to this idea of what our life was supposed to be, but you don't get to dictate how my story ends. You've already written your own, and now I'm going to write mine. Without you. Jack opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. No more excuses. No more promises that you're going to change, that things will go back to the way they were. I can't live in that fantasy anymore. I'm done pretending that everything is okay, that we can just go back to how things were. We can't. I won't let myself keep living in the past. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps regret, perhaps guilt, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. I had already made my decision. I need you to leave, I said, my voice calm but resolute. I need space. I need time to figure out what comes next. For me, for the kids, I'll handle things from here. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was strained. I never wanted to hurt you. You already have, I replied, my gaze unwavering. And now it's time for me to stop hurting myself. Jack stood there, silent for a moment, before he finally nodded, slowly. He didn't look at me as he turned to leave, his steps heavy, like he was carrying the weight of his own regret. As the door closed behind him, I felt something shift within me. The silence of the house was deafening, but it wasn't a silence of emptiness. It was a silence of possibility. I had finally let go. I had finally taken control of my own story. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions. The kids were confused, of course. They didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, why he wasn't around anymore. But I kept things as stable as I could for them, focusing on their needs, on their well-being. I didn't want them to feel the weight of the situation any more than they had to. I continued with my new routines. The yoga, the cooking class, the photography. It was hard at first, but I kept pushing myself, reminded of the woman I was trying to reclaim. A woman who had dreams, who had a life outside of being a wife and mother. A woman who could stand on her own. But as I moved forward, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that Jack's betrayal wasn't the only thing I had to reckon with. It wasn't just about him choosing someone else. It was about what I had allowed myself to become. I had let myself fade into the background, waiting for a man to define me. And now, I realized I couldn't let that happen again. I was going to rebuild, not just my life, but my sense of self. And that journey, though painful, was going to be mine alone. I was no longer the woman who had been left behind. I was the woman who had chosen herself. And no one could take that from me. The first few weeks after Jack left felt like a blur, a continuous fog of emotions, decisions, and moments of surprising clarity. In the mornings, I still felt the heaviness of the silence in the house. The kids were with me most of the time, but there were moments when their questions about their dad pierced through, reminding me of the life we used to have. And then, in the evenings, when they were in bed, the weight of the loneliness crept in again. I wasn't used to being alone. Even though Jack and I had been drifting for a while, I had still clung to the idea of us. I had assumed the future would always have him in it, and that the stability of our family was something unshakable. But now, I was faced with the stark reality that I didn't have that comfort anymore. I didn't have him to rely on, didn't have the life I thought we would grow old in. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, it didn't disappear, but it started to feel more manageable. I had found a routine. I had found ways to fill the emptiness with things that were mine, things that didn't revolve around Jack or his betrayal. I had started to feel like myself again, the person I had almost forgotten existed beneath all the roles I had played. There were still moments when I thought about him, about Lisa, about everything we had been. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. Instead of drowning in them, I started to redirect my focus. I had started therapy. I knew I couldn't navigate this alone, not when everything felt so overwhelming. My therapist, Nadia, was kind but direct. She didn't let me hide behind excuses or self-pity. She helped me face the uncomfortable truths about myself, the ways I had neglected my own needs, how I had let myself fade into the background of my marriage. It wasn't easy. But little by little, I began to rebuild my sense of self-worth. One afternoon, as I was leaving a therapy session, I decided to take a detour and walk around the park near my house. The weather had finally warmed up and the trees were starting to bloom. The air smelled fresh, and the sun felt like a warm hug against my skin. I wasn't sure what exactly made me stop, but I saw an old friend of mine, Megan, sitting alone on a bench, reading a book. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Megan?" I asked, surprised. It had been years since we had last spoken, before I had gotten so wrapped up in family life. "What are you doing here?" She put the book down and gestured to the space next to her. "Just taking a break from life," she said with a laugh. "Mind if I join you?" I sat down beside her, and we talked for the first time in a long while. We caught up on the little things, her job, her family, her travels, and I told her a little bit about what had been going on with Jack. I didn't go into too much detail, but I didn't hide the truth either. "You're doing okay?" she asked after a while, her eyes soft with concern. I hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'm getting there. I'm not sure I know what okay looks like right now, but I'm starting to feel like I'm not going to crumble under this." She smiled gently, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "You're stronger than you think. You just have to give yourself the chance to realize it." I didn't know it at the time, but Megan's words stuck with me. The more I thought about them, the more I realized how often I had doubted my own strength. For so long, I had placed my worth in someone else's hands, in Jack's hands. Now, I was learning to find it within myself. That evening, I sat down at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, my mind buzzing. I had spent the day taking care of everything, making dinner, picking up the kids from school, running errands. But now, in the quiet of the house, I could finally hear my own thoughts again. I picked up my phone and called Claire. She had been my rock throughout this, always there with a listening ear and encouragement, but tonight, I felt like I needed to take things a step further. "I need to do something about all of this," I said, my voice firm. "I've been letting my anger simmer, but I'm not just going to sit here and let Jack walk away with no consequences. It's time I take control of the situation, and I think I need to confront Lisa, for my own peace of mind." There was silence on the other end, then Claire spoke slowly. "Are you sure you want to do that? It's one thing to deal with Jack, but confronting her, that's something else entirely." "I need closure," I said. "I need to look her in the eye and hear it from her. I can't move on until I do. I'm not doing this to win him back. That ship has sailed. But I need to know that I stood up for myself. I need to take control of the narrative." I heard the hesitation in Claire's voice. "Okay, just be careful. Make sure this is for you, not for anything else." I promised her I would. But even as the words left my mouth, I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the final piece of the puzzle. The thing that would help me close the door on Jack, on our life, on everything that had come before. The next day, I went to my therapist's office and told her what I was planning. Nadia didn't immediately discourage me. Instead, she asked a question that hit me hard. "Why do you think you need to confront her?" I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "I guess I feel like I've been the one left in the dark, like I've never had a chance to truly understand why. I need to see her face to face. I need to know that this is really over. And I need to know that I didn't do anything wrong." Nadia nodded, her gaze steady. "Sometimes we do things because we want closure, but I want you to think about what you need from this encounter. If it's about healing, then it might help. But if it's about revenge, it might just keep you stuck." I left her office that day feeling conflicted. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. Was confronting Lisa going to give me the peace I craved, or was I simply setting myself up for more heartache? But I realized something as I walked to my car. I wasn't doing it for Jack. I wasn't doing it to win him back. I was doing it for me, because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid of facing the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next afternoon, I found myself standing outside a small cafe where Lisa worked. It wasn't the kind of place I imagined she would be, more artsy than glamorous, but it made sense. Jack had always been drawn to that kind of thing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This wasn't about aggression or anger. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. I stepped inside and found her behind the counter, arranging a fresh display of pastries. She was beautiful, of course, tall, confident, effortlessly chic in a way that made my stomach churn. She didn't notice me right away. I cleared my throat, and when she looked up, her eyes widened in surprise. "Hi," I said, my voice steady but soft. "Can we talk?" Her expression faltered for just a second, but she nodded and motioned for me to take a seat at a nearby table. The next few moments were intense, charged with the emotions I had kept bottled up for so long. It wasn't easy, there was no perfect closure or moment of peace. But in the end, I walked out of that cafe feeling stronger than I ever had before. I wasn't going to let Jack's betrayal define me any longer. I was no longer the woman left behind. I was the woman who had chosen to move forward, and with every step I took, I knew I was reclaiming my own power. This was my story now, and I was finally ready to write the next chapter. I had spent so long defining myself by my past, the years spent with Jack, the life we built, the family we created. But now I was starting to understand something deeper. I could define who I was, moving forward on my own terms. The confrontation with Lisa had given me the closure I needed, not because it gave me answers I'd been seeking, but because it marked the moment I took back control. I no longer needed Jack's apology. I no longer needed Lisa to validate my pain. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I deserved better. I knew I did. But this new sense of self, this newfound strength, didn't come without a cost. Letting go of a life you thought would always be yours is painful. It's a kind of grief I hadn't fully understood until now, the kind that creeps in when you realize you're not just mourning the person who's gone, but the person you used to be, the version of yourself you thought you'd always be. I had spent weeks walking through life in a haze of survival mode, but now I was starting to thrive. The days were no longer just about holding it together, they were about living. I was finding joy again, even in the small moments, watching my kids laugh over a movie, savoring a cup of coffee in the morning light, picking up the phone to talk to friends I had once neglected. But the real breakthrough came when I looked in the mirror one morning and saw something new. I had spent so much time looking at my reflection through the lens of who I had been in relation to Jack, his wife, his partner, his second choice. But now, for the first time in years, I didn't see myself through his eyes. I saw myself for who I was, whole, capable, strong. And it felt like I was finally coming home to myself. I had decided to take a week off from everything. A week for me, no therapy appointments, no kids' schedules, no expectations. Just time to breathe and figure out what came next. My friends had all noticed the change in me. Claire, especially, had been my rock through this entire process, but now she was seeing a version of me that was more at peace, more empowered than before. I took a long walk through the park, something I hadn't done in years. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and the air smelled like the earth waking up after a long winter. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. As I walked, I let my mind wander, not to Jack or the betrayal, but to me, to the future that was mine to create. I had always dreamed of traveling. I had once loved the idea of exploring new places, experiencing different cultures. But after years of putting my dreams on hold for a marriage that didn't work, I realized that if I didn't start now, I never would. I could create a life full of the things that made me happy, without guilt, without the constant shadow of someone else's choices. It wasn't just about travel, it was about freedom. Freedom from the constraints of my past, from the expectations others had placed on me. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of Jack's needs, of my role as a wife and mother. Now, I could be me. I could be the person I had neglected, the woman who had dreams and desires that didn't have to revolve around anyone else. That evening, I called the kids' school and booked a meeting with their teachers. I wanted to make sure they were okay, adjusting to the changes in our lives. They had been through so much in such a short time. But as I spoke to their teachers, it was clear that they were adapting well. They were resilient, just like me. Over the next few months, I took small steps to build the future I wanted. I traveled, nothing big, just short trips to places I had always wanted to see. I went to Paris with Claire, and while I was there, I had an epiphany. The cobblestone streets, the art, the history, it reminded me that there was so much more to life than what I had been focused on. It wasn't about Jack. It was about me finding joy in the world again. I didn't need anyone's approval or permission. I also started getting more serious about my career. I had always been passionate about writing, but had never pursued it seriously. Now, I began taking online courses, joining writing groups, and even submitting some of my work for publication. It felt incredible to create something from scratch that had nothing to do with my past, something I could truly call my own. But the most important change came from within. I no longer feared the unknown. I no longer let the fear of being alone hold me back from living fully. I realized that I had spent so many years relying on the stability of a man, of a family, and that while those things were beautiful, they didn't define my worth. I had always been enough. And then, one evening, Jack called. I had been bracing myself for this moment, wondering how I would feel when it came. Would I still be angry? Would I still feel betrayed? Would I want him back? He started with the usual pleasantries, how the kids were doing, how work was going, but eventually the conversation turned to the reason he called. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice hesitant. "I'm sorry for everything that happened. I didn't handle things well. I wish I had done things differently." I felt a momentary tightening in my chest, the familiar ache of the past creeping in. But I quickly reminded myself that I wasn't the same person I had been when we first split. "Jack," I said softly but firmly, "I've forgiven you, but I've also forgiven myself." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of his regret, but it didn't affect me the way it once would have. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice quieter now. "You don't have to be," I replied. "I don't need your forgiveness to move on. I'm moving forward, Jack. Not for you, not for anyone, but for me, and I'm finally happy again." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice full of resignation. "I get it, I do." And then, just like that, the conversation ended. There was no big, dramatic resolution. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was the ending I needed. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and I knew, deep down, that I was ready to close this chapter of my life for good. It's been a few months since that phone call, and I'm different now. Stronger, more confident. The woman I was before Jack and I met, before I defined myself by someone else's love, is the woman I am now. I've built a life for myself that isn't centered around what anyone else expects from me. It's a life I've created, step by step, with my own hands. I still have my kids, of course, and I'll always be their mother. But I'm also something more now. I'm someone who can stand on her own, who can walk through the world with her head held high. I'm someone who can choose her own happiness. And that's something I'll never take for granted again. I may have been broken at one point, but I'm whole now. And I'm never going to let anyone or anything take that away from me. This is my story, and I'm the one writing it. And with every chapter, I'm becoming the person I was always meant to be. This is just the beginning.